We're live there. Oh, that's amazing. Okay, that's up and running. Okay, fantastic. Well, Scott, thanks for joining me. I guess I'm joining you. I don't really know which way we're calling this one. I get to join your Substack as a I wish a celebrity, but just as a regular guy. So I appreciate you speaking to me on this.
How about if you introduce yourself and then I'll introduce myself?
Yeah, for sure. So, um, full name Jeff Tezak. I'm the co-founder of Tiiga. In your Substack, you kind of mentioned us a little bit, but we are a baobab-based health and wellness brand. So we take baobab fruit, which grows wild throughout Africa, and we put it into different products and value add that main ingredient, hoping to improve people's health. We're actually out of Lincoln, Nebraska. Met my co-founder out here, and yeah.
And I'm Scott Marsland, practice partners with Dr. Pierre Corey. And we have a telemedicine practice that focuses on treating long haul post-acute sequelae of COVID, vaccine injury, and we also do adjunctive cancer care. And you can look us up. You can look up Leading Edge Clinic, and you'll find us at www.drpierrecorey.com. And Jeff and I met months ago, back when I wrote a Substack about Baobab, and he reached out to me, and we had a great conversation, great connection.
Yeah.
Do you remember when exactly was that? It was,
Man,
I think it was
that
in
was
the
probably
winter.
February. Yeah, it was super
Yeah,
early. And I mean, I think I got sent your Substack and I read it and I was like blown away. One, that people were thinking about Baobab in a different way. And so I like had to reach out to you and I was like, what is happening? What are you actually doing? And then I remember we talked for almost 2 hours, just about everything that you've seen over the last, 2 or 3 years using it or just being introduced to it. And then you just went into all sorts of other things that you guys do. And as you know, I'm a junkie for learning about all this kind of stuff, health and wellness. That's why we created it. So yeah, it was really cool. But that was February because I remember we wanted to try to do something like this in, I don't know, over the summer, and it just couldn't work out. You were super busy.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And in the meantime, hopefully we'll get into talking about how Baobab is antiviral, antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, antifungal. But one of the things that you taught me, which has actually been quite helpful, is that there's several studies that show that baobab is a lipid lowering agent. And, one of the things that we struggle with a lot is patients who come to us who are taking statins, because statins, they just totally devastate the mitochondria, which are energy producing powerhouses in our cells. They make ATP. And the spike protein has really dysregulated mitochondria for many people. Even if they don't have long haul and vaccine injury, it's still, people don't have as much energy as they used to. And that's part of why.
Yeah.
And if somebody was on a statin before they had COVID, it really set them up for injury. And so uh, Baobab is really, it's like a Swiss Army knife of a
That's how I feel about it, but it's good.
right.
It's good to hear from somebody else that's really trying to test
Totally,
it in this manner. Yeah,
totally. And what else? I mean, there these things go together, right? When you start talking about impaired fasting glucose, or you talk about type 2 diabetes, you talk about metabolic syndrome, where people have elevated lipids because their fasting blood sugar is like above 100. In functional medicine, we try to get a fasting blood sugar below 85, right? And baobab, I have seen in real time, like I would say, like over a period of as short as a month, I've seen a patient repeat their fasting blood glucose and have it come down like 10 points, just because that was the only thing they changed. They added baobab. And I've seen some really beautiful lipid profiles where,
it's
the
so crazy. Yeah,
patients,
yeah.
yeah, the patient's cardiologist or their primary care doctor, they were really lobbying hard to get the patient to stay on the statin. And the patient's like, I don't want to be on a statin, but they're willing to do the baobab. And then, they have like their annual visit with their primary And I'm like cheering in the background, like, woohoo!
Yeah, like
I
what is making this so much better?
yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, I know it firsthand from personal use, but this is just amazing to hear this stuff.
So have you seen that in your own labs too, or you're saying you know it just because you
Just
have
the
the
way I
background?
feel, like
Yeah.
for me, and we have this with a bunch of customers, but from the feedback that we get is like people legitimately feel different on it, and they can't really describe what it is a lot of times because these are a lot of functions that you just feel better that you can't necessarily describe. And I think that's been the most interesting part about. That's why I was super interested in reaching out to you originally, is because there is some research which we have, which I'll try to share. I got to figure out how to. Oh, I might be able to share this chat. So give me one sec. I'll kind of show you. So we've kind of put together research, but again, there's not a ton of it that has been. Let me see if that posted. I don't know if that posted, but um, you know, most of it's been anecdotal over time. The way that people describe it throughout Africa. So there's a great book on the Hadza tribe, which is out of Tanzania, and they're hunter-gatherer tribe, and they use it for all sorts of things, right? And so they consume it as a daily use product whenever it's available, and it's the only staple that kind of runs for most of the year in their diet, which is really interesting if you think about it, because just a regular fruit that you just find on a tree that grows wild, right? But it has all these unique properties, and so the research that has been done, luckily, has mainly been done, and this is why I didn't. That's why I was so, when we chatted, I was learning so much from you. Is that mainly it's done on the fiber content, the blood glucose levels just in general. And that was mainly a lot of it to start. More and more keeps on coming out actually in the last few years about it. But there's just still so much that's not known about it because there's so much that has been just used over time anecdotally.
Yeah, maybe I can recap what we see clinically, right?
Yeah,
I
start
mean,
there.
maybe I can tell the story real quick about how did this ever come up in the first place, right?
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
like the reason I heard about Baobab is because Pierre, my partner, went to a conference in Hawaii and decided to stay for another week and do some windsurfing. And
I think that's why they have conferences there, right? It's like,
right,
yeah.
right, yeah. And so that was he was getting a little crispy, and I said, you know what, just let me cover your patients for a week and just relax. And so I followed up with one patient because we check their spike antibody levels. We've used that as a proxy for background level spike in patients. We've been doing that for a long time. And this is a person who was an ICU nurse. She's married to a primary care doctor, a physician who works in a clinic every day. She tested the whole family. So I got this profile back, and she was like 7,000. She had a college age daughter who was like 3,500. She had a high school age daughter who was like 1,500. None of them are vaccinated. And then the husband's value was like pretty much zero. And I was like, this doesn't make sense. So I called her, and I was like, so you're telling me that you, the woman, that you have long haul, but your husband, he got how many shots? He got 2 mRNA shots, and he works in a clinic every day around people who are shedding and vax, and his spike antibody levels is zero. She's like, yes. I was like, there's something missing here. Like, what is he doing? Like, is there some magic potion or lotion? Like, I don't know. Does he
Right?
do
Like it just doesn't make
extended?
sense. Yeah.
It didn't make any sense, right? And really, I felt like a dentist trying to extract a tooth. Like I was like, like really, like for a half hour, I grilled her. And at the very end of the conversation, I was like, well, look, you've been very patient. I appreciate your time. If you think of anything, she said, you know what? There is this stuff that he drinks. And I could hear her going through the cabinet, like opening the cabinet, like it's just like ba 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 ba. It was like,
That's about the name
ba-
that everybody
I,
says.
right. I was
Bababoo. Yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
spell it for me, right? And she said, yeah, he's been drinking this stuff for years. He like mixes it up with,
I
I
think
don't
I
even
remember you
remember,
just said like basic like stevia or something.
stevia and ginger. He makes a drink
Yeah,
and he
ginger's a
sips
really
it
good
all
one.
day long,
Yeah.
right? And I was like, it's not the ginger and it's not the stevia. So when I got off the phone with her, I spent the next 4 hours on PubMed, like looking up studies about baobab. And pretty early on in the reading, I saw, oh, this stuff has EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate, and the bells started ringing because there were numerous papers early in the pandemic that showed that EGCG, or epigallocatechin gallate, blocks spike entry into cells. That is the active ingredient in high quality green tea, right?
Yeah, you were saying with
And
like the oolong teas, correct? I think I remember this too.
well, there's you can
Or is
rank
it
them,
just the green
right?
tea?
Um, I think the green tea with the most EGCG is matcha. It's like the most expensive
Ah,
stuff, right? Matcha
matcha
powder.
A. There's like four. There's like four levels of matcha too. You can get the nice
Yeah,
ones
yeah,
and the average ones.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
Right.
probably the nice one.
Let's just go for $100 a container of the ceremonial matcha, right?
Yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
then there's sencha, which is also an expensive Japanese tea. I actually don't know about oolong. Like somebody who's more of a tea snob than me would probably know, but clearly that is not the only thing going on for baobab. And I would defer to you that you may have, from your reading and exploration, more of a sense of the other compounds in it. Like it's got
Yeah. Well, the
fiber.
polyphenol count. So what I'll go from even just a product development standpoint. So we the original idea was baobab. Haruna, my co-founder's native drink is baobab milk and honey. And if you think about that from just a daily like a anecdotal product, right, that you would consume, it's got you get glucose, right? You're going to get proteins, fats, and then you're going to get the fiber. Well, the unique part that I never thought about with baobab, and this is actually I think the biggest part, is the polyphenol counts and the antioxidants that come from it. It has more antioxidants than literally like we have the ORAC counts. It has more than any other, I would say, superfood or superfruit that you have out there. And so that kind of originally I was just like, hey, let's create a product that value adds baobab. But as we got into it, we started to learn more about all these other benefits because all I was trying to use was a whole food because baobab in its natural state, which I think is the hardest thing to explain, is a natural powder. So from a product development standpoint, it's a unique ingredient because you don't have to pasteurize it, you don't have to change its form. You can create powder-based products. And so I was just like, let's figure out what we can add to this from an electrolyte because it already had kind of natural electrolytes. And I really hadn't gotten into all these other benefits that it started to have. And so what happened was I think we just started selling it to people. And at the same time, I kept on researching as I got back information from customers about what they were feeling and what was happening. And then more and more information had come out. And so what we found is one, the prebiotic content and then the fiber content is even higher than we thought. So it's actually closer to 64% fiber. Most of that is soluble fiber. It's about, I think, 85, 90%. It's just going to range, obviously, because it's wild, of soluble fiber. And then there's insoluble fiber. And what's interesting about that is, like I was saying, from a product development standpoint, we wanted to make a sparkling based product, but you can't sparkle a high fiber product. It just won't sparkle. So that's how I started to gather that there was a ton of fiber in it. And so that's originally why we started going down this prebiotic route. If you look at our products, we'll say gut health is because from the basic understanding of prebiotics now, because I think they're pretty known, whereas they weren't even 10 years ago. Fiber and prebiotics make sense as gut health, right? But what doesn't make sense and where we're really seeing the difference in how you feel is antioxidant count, which because like you said with the green teas, you drink it, you consume it, it's enjoyable, but you don't necessarily feel this differentiation, or you don't see it in a blood test, right? But that's what's starting to come back on the other side. And so that's where I've seen the real difference is the polyphenol count. Now, what polyphenols also do, and this is where I'm not an expert, is they help with the microbiome a ton. Their ability to help with leaky gut and other things is insane. And so that's the next stage that we're really interested in learning about is how these polyphenols are really making a difference in people's um, microbiomes. And so that's what my next area that I'm going to be really exploring and trying to pay attention to. But those are just the main areas that we focused on. Now, that being all said, it still has an amazing electrolyte content. So there was a study. That's why we originally did it as a hydration drink. There was a study probably 30 years ago in Sudan where they checked, I think it was like, it was an oral rehydration solution. They were worried about diarrhea for children. And they literally tested baobab on its own, baobab I think with sugar, and then baobab with an actual electrolyte blend at the same time. And what was ironic is there's very little difference between all three, which is insane to think about. But the way that it's used and the way that what it does for your stomach, I think it's able to retain that extra bit of water. So from a hydration standpoint, you're retaining a little bit more water either through that fiber or it's doing something else that we just don't understand completely. And that's where I've kind of like piggyback. And so that's like, if you think about it from a product standpoint, there's just too many benefits, right? And that's why when you posted what you were talking about, I was like, oh man, let's get into these other areas that we can actually test and understand because they're not visible, right, to your daily life, or you don't feel them directly. Because even with like a fiber drink, you feel full. So satiation's a big one. So from product development and understanding, consumers and what we're looking for outside of just function, right? Like enjoyability and mouthfeel and taste. It had all this, but it was in a unique way. And so that was a
It,
long-winded way of saying there's just
no,
so many benefits.
that's perfect. And it made me think of a couple things along the way in terms of what's measurable, right?
Yeah.
I had mentioned too, like we measure amyloid fibrin microclotting, right? This type of clotting, which is abnormal. It's very normally a blood clot has the ingredients in it that when it's served its purpose, it'll break itself down, right? But the spike protein triggers these abnormal microclots. And we send blood to our colleague, Dr. Jordan Vaughn in Birmingham, Alabama. He uses an electron microscope, gives us a result between 1 and 4. There were some early indications that people who were using Baobab were seeing improvement in their amyloid fibrin microclotting. And it took a little bit before I came to understand, like, oh, EGCG, it doesn't just block spike entry into cells, it actually inhibits platelet aggregation. So if someone takes too much EGCG, we use EGCG also in our adjunctive cancer care. And if someone is taking multiple therapies that have anticoagulant properties, you can overdo it, especially if someone's getting a lot of EGCG. But Baobab seems to like hit a good balance,
Hmm.
right? Another thing that we measure, there's a company called Genova Diagnostics out of Asheville, North Carolina, and we'll send 2 or 3 day stool samples there. And, they do both microscopic analysis, they do PCR testing, they're looking at the commensal bacteria. And the bifida population and people who are drinking Baobab is pretty good. And that also goes back to how has the spike protein harmed us and how is the baobab helpful in us recovering from that? Because one of the populations of bacteria in the gut that the spike protein particularly targets is bifida. And there have been explanations in papers that the reason babies and children tend to have such mild forms of COVID and not get long haul is because the highest amount of bifida in our gut is when we're born, right? And then unless we're thoughtfully caring for our microbiome population, like, by the time, if you make it to 90, by the time you're 90, like there's not a heck of a lot of bifida left. But that I would love to see what the bifida content is of someone in, what's the name of the tribe?
It's Hadza. It's like
The Hazda.
Hadza. Yeah, Hadza.
I'd love to see what the bifida content is of a 90-year-old in the Hazda tribe, because I'll
Well,
bet
they
it's
did.
robust.
Yeah, and they did like even just from a micro like a the flora, like the different flora that's in the gut, and it was exponentially more than say the Mediterranean diet. It's a really interesting. They have that study. They've studied them for everything. The one that I've been reading recently was more of an anthropological one, where they kind of went into like the revering of the baobab fruit and not revering, but how they use it in everyday life and the ways that they consume it and the ways that they view it. So like they use it for baby weaning, like one of their main ways of getting people,
Really?
yeah, which is which is crazy. And mainly it's a paste. You just put it with water. And I assume, it has that same texture. It has all the micronutrients. And there's got to be something else that we don't know about baobab that it's able to do this. But yeah, I would love to see the gut because we're having so many things sterile. And this is what I've been so excited about like the baobab fruit in general is you can consume it in its raw form. And there's just very few things now that we can consume in a raw form, right? So you rarely get that unique benefit of consuming things as nature intended you to, right? You think about anything that we process in a glass, in a drink, we're pasteurizing it, which isn't to say that pasteurizing is bad, right? You had to at some point not, have all the bacteria pass across. You want to transport something from California to, New York, but you've lost a lot of the value. And so that was a big thing when we looked at creating types of products, say in the products world. It was, should we do a bottle drink? No way to start because I want to maintain all these nutrients because I want to drink something or I want to consume something that I'm able to receive all the nutrients possible from it without having potentially gotten rid of any of it. So
You,
I can only imagine their diets and what their stomachs look like.
this is a good point to say when we first met and you shared some samples of the product that you had at the time. Um, there were some readers of my Substack that were critical and saying, yeah, I don't like some of the things that are in this. But as I understood from our last conversation, like you've done a fair amount of market research and also especially with people in the natural foods industry, people who've been um, into clean eating and natural foods like since the 70s, and you've changed your product. I'd love to hear you talk about that, just so kind of bring people up to speed. And
Yeah.
just
So
for the record, like I've got no financial interest in Tiiga. I think that this is something. I think it's a product of integrity that comes from small communities, and it's a win-win-win.
yeah, and I'll get into that side in a little bit, but I'll kind of explain because I think our conversation with you was an interesting one. There's a few that we've had, other than obviously feedback left and right from customers and then buyers, just all sorts of feedback. So what we took from it was originally it was a lot of positioning too. So originally, and you didn't have this at the beginning because I don't feel like all this research was out that we knew the actual benefits of baobab. So originally we were focused as a hydration drink. My background was baseball. I had gotten done with baseball, but I wanted a low calorie, nutrient dense, whole food type of hydration product. So originally in formulation, a hydration electrolyte or like oral rehydration solution needs a little bit of sugar. Wanted to add some B vitamins, some other things to it to kind of make it easier to drink. And so that was originally the formula. Well, what we found out pretty quickly was obviously if we're catering to people that are trying to have more antioxidants in their body, right? If you're trying to, like you said, potentially a cancer protocol, if you're potentially using it for blood glucose levels, right, to manage those, well, sugar is useless at that point. So right away it was kind of like, okay, what's a great replacement that's also an added benefit in the product? So right away we switched out sugar for a coconut water blend. So now we take a product that sits potentially in the fiber section of a store and it's 70% fruit. So that way you're consuming literally mainly fruit. And then from there, I still find that hydration is extremely important, say from a gut perspective for constipation, bloating, just all of the above. So we wanted to maintain some sort of electrolyte blend, but we were able to get rid of kind of the gums from it. Baobab has a unique texture. If you haven't had it already on its own, if you have it with too much, it's potentially gritty, but it's usually not. If you have a lighter, it's just a nice light taste, but it's hydrophobic, so it necessarily doesn't always mix. But in our kind of formula, it does. So we were able to get rid of the gums. We took out B vitamins. So it's literally this short list of baobab, coconut water, and an electrolyte blend with flavor. And the idea behind that was, like I said, and we lowered the sodium a little bit because honestly, I don't think you should drink one baobab a day. Like we've talked about it, you consume how many grams of baobab do you consume a day?
Well, I I mix a tablespoon of baobab in 16 ounces of water and I sip it over the course of the day. If I'm
Yes.
going to, and we can get into shedding and using baobab like when you're traveling, like if I'm going to an airport, getting on a plane in a conference, like I'm drinking it all day long.
Yeah, so I was gonna say for Julie, actually, I think the first thing that baobab you have to think about when consuming it, and you might have run into this, is the gut benefit. And actually, that's usually the one that will affect you the most. Is just if you have a fiber diet or if you don't have a fiber diet. We got it tested from a FODMAP perspective. I don't know if you're familiar with FODMAPs, but
Yeah.
it doesn't ferment in the gut the same way. So it actually you can have a decent amount. But what I found is I always say for people that don't consume any fiber, like if you have a very low fiber diet, that's where you might be affected. But from consumption wise, you can go. I mean, I make literally like 2 or 3 scoops of baobab, which is roughly 20 something grams of baobab a morning, and I just kind of sip that. I've kind of taken your advice on it. I like the sipping of it. I really enjoy to consume it kind of over the course of a day. If you have it plain, it's a nice like tang, and if
Yep.
with the Tiiga, you get a little sweeter, so you kind of get the tang with the sweetness. But you can consume, just for reference, the Hadza tribe consumes, I think it was upwards of 150 grams of fiber. So that would be closer to 250, 300 grams of baobab a day potentially at certain times, um, which is also insane to think about that you can consume that much fiber of anything, right? But they're literally consuming that much, and it's not affecting them. So obviously, you can consume a bunch of it. I think you had said there was some weird thing with the feet that I had never heard of, like a neuropathy almost, which I thought was really interesting. And how did you feel that, or hear about that, or get to that one? Because that
You
was
know,
something I had never
I
heard of.
experienced that myself when I first started it. Um, I mean, this is where things get kind of, these are subtle
The
but important
anecdotal,
points
yeah, yeah.
with people who are you know, we say that the syndrome of long haul and vaccine injury is essentially MECFS, myalgic encephalitis chronic fatigue syndrome, in a different incarnation. And so there's this underlying oxygen deprivation, because of the clotting that's going on in the background. And, the farther away from the spinal cord you get, the more that I mean, basically the nerves don't have insulation. They don't have myelin, right? So they're more vulnerable when they don't get enough oxygen. Um, there is some, there is some way that and I actually haven't had an interaction with someone who I would consider an expert in MCAS more than us, because all of us in our practice have had to develop expertise in mast cell activation. But I, like my colleague, Dr. Tina Piers in the UK, um, she's not necessarily familiar with baobab. So I haven't been able to say, hey, Tina, do you think baobab is like a high
It's
histamine
crazy because
food?
it's pretty prevalent there. It's really actually pretty prevalent there. There's an amazing company doing a lot of work. They get their baobab out of West Africa, so they get it out of mainly Ghana, and they've really pushed it
And so
pretty well there.
the English people drink it, or the African community in England?
No, it's a decent amount of English people know it, but it's still not. Again, I think the reason we even started was to value add baobab, because I think to really, you can stay niche and people will learn about. So there'll be two points of difference, right? So you'll have the people from the native place that consume it. So give you an example. Because I was just up in Minneapolis, and there's a decent amount of African stores there, and so I went in and was chatting to him, and there was a guy from, say, he was from Cameroon, and Cameroon doesn't really have baobab trees, and he was just like, I don't even know what baobab is. Or you go even in Ghana, as simple as Ghana, right? North and South. If you're in South Ghana, you might not even know what it is. We were at a dietetics show with some dietitians. She was from Ghana. She was like, "What is baobab?" And I'm like, "You're from Ghana? Like, no way! This is awesome! Like, how do you not? Because the north of Ghana has it. So it's really regional. So that's one consumer of the product, and then the other one thus far has kind of been in this health space, right? Like very focused on their health, a very raw ingredient for the benefits. And so where we wanted to bridge the gap was bringing it together, right? Where you're looking for health benefits, you're looking for something to enjoy and easy to consume, and that was kind of our goal. And I still think that's the goal that's has been as I would say hindered some other companies like that have really focused on it as a commodity or a raw ingredient. And we started selling it as a raw ingredient just recently. I think a lot of it was after I had chatted to you, and I was like, you know what? Like, there's going to be this amount of people that really just want baobab on its own. And that's kind of how they can consume it. If that's how they want it, you can add it to smoothies. There's all sorts of fun things you can do. Where we saw the value was trying to get it to more mass communication, or even the natural product space, say the natural product space, which a lot of people that know a lot about ingredients, but they might have never heard of baobab, which is literally like 99% of Americans. And so we wanted, like I said, bridge that gap for them. And so in the UK, they've mainly still sell it as just baobab powder on its own, and maybe a little blend of something else. Where we're really going to see a stick is like the type of products that we're creating, where you consume it as a drink, like it's a better for you sodas now. Like that's who I think ours tastes better than, right? And like that's who we can compete against for a daily consumption. And I hope it gets big in the UK. We hope to actually launch there sooner than later, just because I think that market would be an amazing market because they're, especially with African connections.
So one of the questions that's come up with patients is concern around dentition, right? Because when I talk to patients about it, my suggestion is that they sip it over the course of the day, partly because, especially when someone's first trying it, sometimes people's neuropathy paresthesias get kicked up if they drink it. And the other thing is, especially in people who are vaccine injured, right? If they're still making spike, or if they're working like teachers working in the school, or nurses working in the hospital, or people working in customer service, like in public facing jobs, could be a lot of people, could be people working retail, they're getting exposure from people who are still getting vaccinated and they're shedding the virus. And so sipping baobab, sip, sip, sip over the course of the day gives them this drip, drip, drip of EGCG and whatever qualities we haven't identified that are helping to protect them, right? Anti-inflammatory. And then an objection that a few people have raised is like, well, to me, the baobab is acidic, and I'm afraid it's going to break down my enamel. I'm curious
Oh, interesting.
if you've ever encountered that or have any feedback about that.
Yeah, I was going to ask first. I saw Ed jumped in here with his intake. I assume he
Great.
was
Hi,
one of your
Ed.
patients. I think he was one of the patients that was probably going through that, where like was starting to feel some of that at higher doses. So is that about right, or was that? I wanted to touch on that first. I thought that
You know
was
what?
super
I think
interesting.
I think you can see the people coming in, and I can't see anything on
Oh
my end.
no,
So
there's no. Yeah, my bad. So Ed, I'll just tell you kind of what happened. So Ed was saying that the reduces baobab to like 1/8 tablespoon, or I think teaspoon. And he said he felt better. He said some people felt better, and so he just was saying, can you touch on that? I wish that I didn't know that you couldn't see the comments. I'll try to read those off for you then.
so uh, their patients helped us figure this out, right? There's a patient I have who literally, if she goes over a flat quarter teaspoon of baobab a day, she'll have all kinds of what we would call mast cell reactions, right?
Hmm.
But if she keeps it at a flat quarter teaspoon or an eighth of a teaspoon, she gets lovely benefits from it. She says head to toe, like less headache, less neck pain, better GI function. She tolerates different foods better. She sleeps better. She feels less anxious. I mean, I don't think that that's I don't think that's just placebo. I mean,
That's insane. Well, it's funny because I'm a big fan of like a big dose, but it's really interesting to hear that potentially it's as low as, like you said, a quarter of a teaspoon, which is like, I should do that in grams because I do grams. I'm not good with ounces, and it's not very much. That's probably like a half a gram or a gram of baobab, which I would have never guessed could have that types of effects. The way that having a large, because you got like pretty much a tablespoon, which is about 7 to 10 grams, and that's where I really feel it. But I mean, that's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing.
the other thing I would say is there are patients. I have a good friend, Betsy, who she and I've had a similar experience. Like goes to a place where there's social exposure, where a lot of the people have been boosted and they're shedding spike. And she'll just, if she starts to get headache, starts to feel poorly, she'll just start pounding the baobab. And you know,
I can
we
account for that one. That one works all the time.
and it helps. It resolves the symptoms, right? I mean, if I have to go to the dentist, like you betcha, I've got my baobab with me, and I before I go into the dentist, like glug 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 glug,
Yeah.
and I have it there on the side. When the dentist takes a break, I glug glug glug. When I come out, glug glug glug. I mean, it's really it's it's a prophylactic. It's a defense. personally, I not only have I not found an issue with the daily sipping and dentition, like both my wife and I have had plenty of dental issues over the years, and last couple times each of us has gone to the dentist is like, I don't know what you're doing, but your teeth are amazing. Like
Yeah,
there's like,
that was what I mean. That's why when you brought up that, it's interesting because most fruits are higher in sugar.
uh-huh.
So to me, I feel like, and I'm not a dental expert by any means, obviously. So I feel like a sugar is going to mess with your teeth more from an enamel standpoint than, I mean, the citric acid potentially, but I think, real citric acid, real ascorbic acid is obviously going to do something different to your mouth. But also, having a better GI is going to improve your dental. Like I think that's part of it too. But Baobab's only like 20% sugar, so I have never seen anything really with my teeth. I don't like I haven't had anything. We haven't ever had anybody from that standpoint. I don't think that was something anecdotally. I mean, I'll ask Haruna about that one actually. Um, for in Burkina where he is about how much, if at all, it affects
Yeah.
dental, but I haven't heard anything on that one.
And and the suggestion, I mean, you may do the same thing. Like I go to work, I got my tea, I've got my water, and I've got my baobab. And kind of what I do is when I'm going through patient visits, like it's like a drinking game. Drink, right? It's just like every time I
Yeah.
mention baobab, I'm like, excuse me, I take a sip.
Well, it's funny. It's funny you say that because I brought that up this morning actually with somebody. This goes into coffee. Well, I kind of want to bring on the same subjects because it'll go back to how you feel on it and how you sip it. I always notice it's really interesting what happens in my gut if I wake up in the morning and say I'm kind of on that fasting, and I'll just have a black coffee, right? No baobab, no kind of tiga beforehand. How quickly, like, boom, it's working. I'm going to the bathroom. My stomach almost feels acidic, like it just feels like something's happening to it. And even if I just have half a glass of Tiga, I usually drink Tiga versus Baobab. I make some fun Baobab drinks, so that I can talk about those. But I'll just do that, and like literally, I can feel the difference in my stomach as I'm drinking the black coffee
Wow.
afterward. It's
Wow.
really interesting, and where we've seen it because originally, as a sports drink, I thought it was really interesting. So sports people don't want fiber, right? Which is ironic because you'll eat an apple or eat a banana on a long run or a long bike, but when they see it on packaging, they're like kind of like, this has got fiber. So a lot of the conversations we had over those first few years was like, oh, this has fiber, and is it going to make me go to the bathroom while running or doing whatever? And what we found was the exact opposite. Like people could have a ton of it, they wouldn't go to the bathroom, they wouldn't cramp as much. It was so great. It's all Baobab. Like it's not the electrolyte blends, kind of whatever. Like it's a good electrolyte blend, but it's not like electrolytes are ever going to make you not cramp, right? You have to consume enough liquid. You have to do everything balanced. You have to have enough food in your gut. But like, uh, I really think it does something different to your stomach, which does something to your overall system. And so I've seen some of those anecdotally. Yeah, but the teeth one's really interesting. I've never even thought about that.
Yeah. It's probably worth just mentioning some nitty gritty about like how do you prepare it. You've introduced, Tiga has introduced an interesting tool where it's like a mixing ball that comes in the Tiga container, right? But
Yeah.
we have a routine in our household these days. It's just part of what we do. Like the night before, I set out the bag of baobab, a Pyrex, like a 2 cup Pyrex container, a tablespoon measuring spoon, and a teaspoon, and for stirring. And I'm like standing there by the sink, kind of bleary eyed, waking up, and that's what I'm doing. I get a cup of ice cold water, and I'm slowly tapping the baobab into the water as I'm stirring, and I'm like smushing out the little
So what do you?
clumps
Oh
of the
man, no
baobab.
way. So let's
Yep.
go into that. So I'll do the preparation because when we were doing the product development, I got very familiar with its consistency and its uniqueness, and I got some way easier ways to do this. So first thing
But
first,
I got to tell you, like I don't mind that. I mean,
you enjoy it. Yeah, it's like almost
it
like a
just takes a
ceremonial
cup.
tea.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. It's like this ceremony of like the
Yeah.
baobab
Yeah.
hydrophobia, the getting rid of it and getting it
Yes.
done. Really quick, I was gonna say too. Let me see because I think Michelle jumped in. Um, And Michelle was saying that, give me one second, I want to jump these really quick. Oh, had COVID and took some within 12 to 24 hours, felt benefits. So I actually want to jump into that too, because we're talking about this. There's another great story I have from doing a presentation at some event talking about Baobab. There's a guy from, I think it was probably Burkina or Mali or somewhere, and he comes up to us after the show and goes, I can't drink or eat Baobab ever again. Like his mom, anytime he got sick growing up, the first thing they did was make a baobab porridge. The first thing. Like literally, you're sick, you're even debatably sick. I still tell people now, anybody that has a cold, anybody's throwing up, I joke that baobab takes you from either side. If you have diarrhea or constipation, it's bringing you back to the middle. And like, I recommend it to anybody that's on that path of getting sick. So I like that Michelle brought that out.
Wow.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Okay, let me see one more because I can see all the samples. So Tisha, my husband is an ultra runner, has gut issues while running, and pops electrolyte pills while running. He's been afraid to try due to the fiber content. Okay, so I just want to touch this with Tisha. Have him try it on a shorter run, but I'm going to be honest. We've had a guy drink 22 Tiiga stick packs, which is 7 times 22. I should be doing my math. 154 grams of baobab, and literally fine. So. And then for Scott, this one, Julie has, so the fiber content would do very little to none. I found it to do very little to none. Maybe have something to eat before the run or the event, and maybe not a ton of caffeine for that event. Because the only time we ever heard something with somebody who was on a marathon where didn't eat forever and they were just consuming Tiga, and eventually you're just gonna fill up and need to go to the bathroom. From Julie Scott, she wants to know, is it okay to take on Warfarin or Warfarin?
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I that's a very subtle consideration, Julie, around the EGCG. In our treatment of adjunctive cancer care patients, we're typically using doses of 400 milligrams of EGCG 3 times a day, like 1,200 milligrams. That's a really large amount. Like in a typical cup of green tea, I think there might be 20 milligrams of EGCG. I think the amount of EGCG in baobab is like even smaller. It might be less than 10 milligrams. I'm ballparking that. So it's more the idea that EGCG inhibits platelet aggregation. And so that is helpful. Yeah. I wouldn't worry about it with Coumadin, not at all.
Oh, amazing. We're starting to get some good questions coming in. So I'm just gonna keep on reading these and then we'll get into the mixing and the ways to utilize it. Cause I think that'll be great for people to kind of test because it might be good, as they look at other ingredients to add with it. So so Jeff, any contradictions or research you've seen with the use in pediatrics? Okay. What's funny they bring this up because I don't know if you were on earlier, Michelle, but like the Hazda tribe in Africa literally uses this as their weaning agent or like their main thing for weaning. And I don't know if I can put the link. Maybe I'll try to put it in afterward as we do the actual like video. And Scott has it. I think you're going to send it out, and then we'll have it like on our website where I'll put a link to a great book that goes into this. And he talks about this, but they literally use baobab in water with babies. We've been giving it to our son since he was 9 months old. Haven't seen anything. Again, at the end of the day, it's a raw fruit that grows wild, and for me, I can't think of a better thing to want to give kids. High in fiber. So I've seen very little. There hasn't been any research that we've seen to contradict that. So that's really interesting on my part. Like I said, where I've wanted to pay attention more so is what they use it for in Africa. And another way, I guess, to tie into the consumption of it. One of the main drinks they drink, like I said before, is baobab milk and honey. And I believe that Haruna gives that to the kids from an early age. Like that's a great drink for them to be consuming. So it's going to be calorie dense. It's going to be extra nutritious, and it's going to sustain them for longer periods of time than otherwise they would. So, okay. And then Sheila has, does this help with immune dysregulation? I kind of passed through. That's for you, Scott.
Well, short answer is yes. Like going back to the fundamental properties of it, kind of when I spent that 4 hours after I first learned about baobab, went to PubMed, just started reading study after study, and which were mostly done by nutritional scientists, and saw this stuff is anti-inflammatory, it's
Yep.
antifungal, it's antibacterial, it's antiviral. Um, and in terms of modulating immune function, right? A robust and diverse population of commensal bacteria is going to lead to better immune function and less autoimmune dysregulation, and that's what we see when we measure the stool samples in patients who are sipping baobab. So I mean, there's going to be individual variations, right? And one of the hesitations or disqualifications that I made earlier is, in our patient population, almost everyone has mast cell activation. Like that's kind of a legacy of the spike protein. Mast cells are these immune cells that are long lived. They last 2 to 4 years in our body, and they release histamine and prostaglandins and leukotrienes and proteases, and they're mostly focused where our body meets the outside world, right? Our eyes, our mouth, our sinuses, our throat, our intestine, under our skin. And there is a small number of people who, when they first engage baobab, they have what you would call a mast cell response, right? They can get sinus congestion. They can, you know, uh, I actually haven't had anyone say I'm itchy, but they can get a headache. They can feel nauseous, and that's where I would just say, if you go low and slow,
Yeah.
literally
Yeah.
an eighth of a teaspoon of baobab.
I
Like,
would, and I would say that from the fiber content, and that's what's so interesting about this, right? It's
mm,
like for me, it's from the fiber content whenever we talk to customers, but for you, it's like you're dealing with obviously a whole other level of patient care. For us, it's the everyday person. I'm like, hey, start slow because maybe fiber content, but again,
yeah,
that's only if you haven't had any, right? Whereas you're like, hey, start slow because you'll feel these effects a
yeah,
lot quicker.
yeah.
So, okay, I got some other ones because these are pretty good. So we're going to start with Philip has a great one. He talks about doesn't mix well in water. So um, he has a cool way that he does it. So he says, I use a salad dressing smoothie shaker container with a sealed lid, add a little water, add 1 tablespoon, then fill 16 ounces, shake it, sip it. So that is one way. Ironically, Tiiga, because we add electrolytes in the coconut water, it's really easy just to shake in, and within five shakes, you open a bottle, back up, shake it again. It's completely mixable. I think it breaks up the particles enough of the baobab to not really act hydrophobic. So for hydrophobic, it means the water's gonna seal, or the powder's gonna seal around itself. It's scared of the water, boom, so the water stays around it. So that's why you get all those clumps in it. So with baobab on its own, I always recommend putting in the water first. So whenever you're making a baobab drink, I think the water first is always key. If you put it at the bottom, you're always going to struggle. That's number one. Number two, I actually think if you can start stirring in, and you just have a rhythm going with the water first, and then you pour it in, you can do it this way, and then you can drink it out of a glass or something like that. At the end of the day, if you put water in, keep a little air, and then use it as a shaker, I think that's the other best way. Michelle brought up frother. I love the frother, and that's more so for when I make fun other drinks. So like I do a baobab and stevia drink and milk, and so I'll use the frother for that. It's almost like a baobab latte, right?
For
It's
those of
super. It's
us
super.
that don't know, what is a frother?
Oh man, so it's a little whisker. So it's you can just buy them for like $10 online, and they whisk the ingredients, and it's a pretty high speed. So you gotta be careful because baobab's so light. Sometimes it'll shoot up. We actually have a video that we just did the other day, and I did it, and it like shot out. But whisk like a little frother. So you just look up like milk frothers for coffee. That's a great way to mix it because it will mix. But if you throw it at the bottom, you're always going to struggle because it is so hydrophobic, man. It sticks to the bottom and the water just comes around it. So it's a really interesting. Yeah, Michelle brought it in here. $10. We need to get you to put the link in there. I should try to find the link for it. Got to get better with this part. So another one, actually, NC folks is a great way to describe this. So they prepare it with hot water, um, and then they make a drink from that. And there is another way to do it with the hot water. It says, or okay, so let me read what she actually wrote. Um, we're getting it going. Start with room temperature water, not cold water. Cold water, like I said, for Tiga, you could do cold, hot. I do it with ice. I actually prefer with ice. Sometimes even try that, like add some ice to it in the glass. Have you ever done that, Scott, where you put ice with it in the
Yeah,
shaker?
Yep.
That actually, ironically, you'd think that colder would be worse, but I don't know. It breaks up the particles the way that they're not connected to each other. I actually think ice is a really good way to do it. That's one of the best ways. But I always leave space at the top of the bottle when you're shaking it in. Then you can always fill up with a little bit more water at the end to kind of top it off. So we have some great recommendations. Okay, so let me go to okay, using hand frother, room temperature one. I like that one. Again, you can boil it. You can do all sorts of stuff with baobab. You can bake with baobab. We haven't gotten into the seed. I don't know if you know much about the seed, Scott, but the seed is pretty amazing as
Nothing.
well. Yeah, so we'll get
Do you
into that
sell
in a
the
second.
seed?
Not yet. We'll start selling the oil pretty soon. So our suppliers have started to manufacture the oil, and the oil is amazing. It feels amazing. It's as you talked about, I believe it's anti like insect repellent. Like they use it in some formats right now, just as like a cream already, right? So it's pretty good for that. So, oh, we had Janice wanted to know have you had any patients with POTS improve by using Baobab or Lyme patients benefits from using it? That would be definitely a you question.
Yeah, I have not seen autonomic dysfunction change either way with Baobab. I haven't seen it make it worse. Um, that would definitely Baobab does a lot of amazing things, but I think that's one particular area that I wouldn't expect it to change things.
For POTS.
Yeah.
Okay. James had a great name for the bao latte. It was a bao latte. I thought that was funny. Jet blender is a good one. I'm just kind of going into some more ways that people use it. This is super cool to see how everybody kind of does it. Does it lose any medical properties if it's cooked or added to baked goods? Oh, okay. So we're going to have to do something else where I get in our manufacturers. They're out of South Africa, and he knows about this. It has a high, I don't remember this, but long story short, in baking properties, it doesn't lose most of its properties, like most of its beneficial
Amazing.
properties. And I don't know why, so I'll have to do my research and get back to everybody on that one. But something happens where it has a resistance to heat at some level, and he was just talking about how it's really good in baking. Ironically, in baking, just for people who are going to try it in baking, from a flour standpoint, whatever you want to put it with, about 10% is the maximum that they found that is still tastes good. I've tried it where it was like all baobab. It has a unique consistency. It's literally like flour. Like it's almost when you baked it, it came out like a perfect cookie, scone, whatever. It's just so tangy and sour that you're just like, I'm not eating this. I guess you could do it with like a lemon scone, or something like that. But it bakes wonderfully, like from a consistency standpoint. I just made a vinaigrette yesterday as well. Um, and it creates a nice tang to it. It's almost like your lemon juice that you could use in a vinaigrette. And it mixes. This is another thing that I think I'm excited about in the next couple of years is really to get people the way that they consume it and think about it is every day, all day. The kind of way that you do it is we've actually for years, and we have other people that do this where they keep it in a container in the fridge, and it. How do I describe this?
You mean
It never
they keep the
No,
dry powder?
no. The we make a liquid mix and keep it in
Okay.
the fridge. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because you think about making in the morning and doing it, whatever.
Yeah.
I actually really like how it gains a little viscosity in the fridge over time. It doesn't
Oh.
really lose its taste, but it gains a slight. It never gets thick. Like it never gets thick. It'll just settle. But you can leave it in the fridge. We'll leave it in the fridge for a week. If you leave it out, no chance. That thing is growing something fast because it's all the micronutrients. I think it's just right away. Um, but yeah, in the fridge, it's amazing, and it adds a little bit of viscosity to it, slight, not a lot, and it's cool. And you already have it kind of mixed, so you just shake it in, and it almost like if you had shaken it in pretty quick. So you've probably seen this. If you stir it in quick, were to drink some of it right away. Sometimes that first initial sip, you'd be like, "Oh, this is a gritty drink," right?
Yeah.
You almost be like, "Oh, it has a grit." Well, the longer that it's going to sit in the liquid, the more that it just smooths out. It's really interesting.
I think that's really good information for people who are ultra sensitive to the texture. That's a turnoff. That's a good pointer.
Yeah, and that's where mixing it in a lot of different ways is really nice. So, like I said, if you can pick certain products or ingredients to mix it with, and again, this is where I say this is obviously a shameless plug, but Tiga, we've done it to where you mix it and it's ready to go. Like it's gonna taste good. You can change the sweetness based on how much water you want to put with it. You can also add it to other things. So like what's unique about what we wanted to do was, say you like drinking black tea, right? Just an example. Well, you can now have a zero sugar black tea, right? Or just a like a 0 calorie, just plain black tea, no sweetener. You put a Tiga like a raspberry lemonade with it. You have a raspberry black, like a Arnold Palmer, and it's just an added bonus to your drink. So if people really struggle with that texture, I feel like we've gotten a long way with our formulas to where the added ingredients kind of really help with that texture component. The other thing is always playing with the liquid content. I always think that's really important. And then it's hard to get your hands on good zero added sugars. So like sweeteners, obviously we make the formula, so I have really intense, high, powerful sweet stevias that are really good, where it's harder to buy that in the stores. But there are ways to kind of sweeten it, which I think is the key for Baobab. Is a lot of times it's just to sweeten it slightly. So for people that are sipping it, don't love it, but are doing it because they have to, there's two camps, right? People that do it obviously for function and like the no sweetness. I think putting a tiny bit of sweetness with it pops it almost like it like enhances the uniqueness of Baobab, because Baobab is citrusy, slight earthy, sherbety, and the sweetness just like it's like becomes this like Baobab. Like I don't know, it's an amazing taste. So um, those are some good suggestions. We had another question about kids. Yes, definitely good for kids. Thank you, Michelle. Michelle's on top of it. And like I said, I'll try to add to our website the entire book, and I'll bring in some articles or some sections on the baby weaning, as that'll be important as well. So, all right, I think we got caught up on all our questions. Let me
So,
see.
people are going to want to know, and shameless plug or not, I mean, you should let people know, like, where can they get it? Because
Yep.
uh, on my Substack, people say, like, who do you recommend, what brand do you use, um, and Baobab's an agricultural product. So I think it's worth letting people know, like, what distinguishes Tiga from others. A little bit about the people that you work with that grow it. I'm interested.
Yep. Yeah. So, and this was a big thing that we've been working on over the last year. So, really getting close with our suppliers who are out of South Africa. We've obviously there's a couple of main people that are the suppliers or manufacturers of the ingredient. By manufacturing, I mean literally seething it to a finer powder, taking out the little bits that are inside. There's some like, I wouldn't call them tentacles. I always forget how you describe them. It's almost like this fibrous tea that like holds all the powders together. So they just see that all that, and then they're doing the final preparations to make it a granular powder or a nice fine powder that then they can go sell. And so we've done a really good job. We developed a really good relationship with a supplier out of South Africa, and so they work right now mainly in Mozambique. And in those communities, if you were to go to those areas, like this ground is completely dry right now. Like it's really bad. And so baobab grows all the time. And so like the harvest obviously was smaller baobabs this year because there was less water. But it's really like the reason it's called the tree of life is it's been used forever in dry seasons as a source of nutrients, like nutrient value. And so what originally got me interested in this whole project or doing Tiga was my co-founder Haruna, who's from Burkina Faso. And in West Africa, I should have had that picture ready to kind of post. So in West Africa, it's still not very commercialized, which is not a bad thing, but that's part of our goal over time is we want to eventually, help manufacturing in the West side. There's a little bit in like I think Ghana. There's obviously Ghana with the UK guys, and there's a couple other people. What they do is they collectively farm. So what happens is they collectively harvest with groups. So we're not there yet in Burkina, but that was what I got introduced to. Was Haruna would say these women would sell it on the side of the road, like literally brought it in from outside of town. They're just selling baobab on the streets, and so the value that I saw there was like you can only sell it at a certain price to those people. Whereas if we can start to bring it together, it's a great way that this tree is growing wild and another way to make money. And so we had to go find the right places to do it to start. And so our supplier out of South Africa works with Mozambique. We have worked with another company that's out of South Africa as well, but Zimbabwe, and they get it from Zimbabwe. And so there's about, I would say, between those two places right now, there's over probably 4,000, 3 or 4,000 harvesters of the fruit, and 80% of those are female. And there was a study done a few years ago where, like, literally most of the extra income from Baobab, which is like 40% more to their income, is going towards education for kids, food for the kids, groceries and supplies. And so that's where we saw, Haruna and I saw it as a real value. We wanted to create to do something where we're buying from people. Like we want to buy, and the reason why we want to make Baobab popular is we want to make sure that we're buying product from them at a fair wage. There's another thing called Fair Wild, which a lot of the Baobab companies have started to do, and so I believe our suppliers and ourselves are in the process. We're kind of in the final stages of that, but it's going to take a little while for us to do that. Where fair wild meaning it's wild harvested, and then fair trade, because that's the whole reason that we got into this is it was just an opportunity to be able to buy products from people at a fair price that otherwise didn't exist. And so that's the real crux of this is we have to create a demand to where we're buying enough to really make a difference in those regions. And there are just so many regions that we can continue to go to. And that was why I really wanted to partner with our suppliers out of South Africa because they see that vision to kind of go to these other areas. And so how they do it, just a little bit of background on that. What'll happen is, and it varies in each area, but some people will collectively farm or collectively harvest, bring it in, crack it open, see that, or crack it open, and then the powder is what's been bought and then transported. Other people will buy the whole fruit in its whole form and transport it that way. And so there's multiple different ways that it's done. Again, it's just logistically, it's hard in a lot of places because the fruit it is grown in these rural regions. So if you think of a baobab tree, is it's a keystone species in that environment, the savannas, but it doesn't grow near each other, so it is far distances. And so that will be, I wouldn't say a problem over time, but it's just one of the areas that's going to be a little bit more difficult. But there's just a ton of it available. And it's just going to be accessing it over time and making sure that it's going to those communities, and so that was why I really wanted to be extremely close with our suppliers, and so and go with them. We're probably going to go next summer out there, most likely to Mozambique, and a lot of it's in the bush, or at least close to there in these rural communities, and just kind of and see what's going on because it's amazing to be able to buy product for people that like it's subsistence farming in a lot of these places. Like there isn't much else, and so this tree grows wild. Like I can't reiterate enough to people. Like there's so many things that you take. My background was history, so like there's so many places that were literally wiped out to put in sugar cane or to plant some other product, soybean, right? And to me, the amazing part about baobab is one, it's revered. I mean, it's revered both in Africa as well as, ironically, it grows in Australia. Two, it's a source of nutrition for both animals, the humans there, and then there's abundance of it because it's a keystone species and it's able to survive. And that's what creates the amazing fruit that comes from it, right? Is that antioxidant properties derived from it having to survive such harsh conditions. But it maintains like it's the craziest tree. Like it just survives. And so that whole nostalgia around it was what really intrigued me, obviously, and then those benefits. And then so from the back end, we've just been trying to figure out ways to kind of demonstrate its value. And so what I saw, like I said, my background was in science, so I couldn't go from this technical side. That's why I've always been like so interested in talking to people like you, is because you're able to relay and help me understand more from the science perspective and those health benefits. Whereas I was always on the consumer side of I enjoy products that taste good, that are also happen to be functional. And so bringing those two together has really been my mission over these last few years.
And what would be the easiest way for someone to get a hold of products that Tiiga makes?
Yeah, so I put it in the chat a few times. So we have just go to our website, drinktiga.com. And I have the bag, so I'll kind of show the difference. So, and I don't get to explain this normally, but this is just strictly baobab, which is kind of what Scott what you used as your protocol.
Yeah, love
And
it.
that's just straight baobab. You get as many servings as you want out of that. That's just the powder. We also do it as a canister as well as a powder, and then we do it as stick packs to go, and it's all in that formula standpoint. So the stick packs are all in our formula. I'll put it in the chat one more time for the website, and then like we'll have links. When you send this out, Scott, I'll kind of add a few links to the video throughout that people can see. But yeah, the website's probably the best place, depending on where you are in the country. A lot of natural product stores. We sell in a lot of natural product stores as well as specific grocery stores. It's on Amazon as well. I think a lot of people, if you don't like going to websites, it's on Amazon as well. And so, just from a clarification on Baobab too, I don't know how far you've gotten into this, but I'm a big fan. Like I know Baobab really well now, and so I think we had a question about this. It's somebody bought some that expired, and so I kind of wanted to jump into this. I think it was, does it lose its medicinal property if frozen? And then I saw one. Um, I swear I saw one where like it expired and then they were like, is it still good? So Baobab, and I think this obviously has to do with you would kind of be with me on this. It's its nutritional properties kind of make it already, and it's high absorbent acid, high acidic, so it's a low acidity, so it's like 3.6, right? It's like it's pretty acidic. Literally lasts for like 5 years, like at least. I mean, it's kind of crazy how long it actually lasts. Obviously, when we sell in the US, you can only have 2 years from that date that you manufacture to the date. So the only thing that'll happen is it'll start to discolor, so it'll go brown. So if anybody's kind of drinking it and it looks a little more brown, and that'll taste a little bit more astringent, maybe a little bit more sour, maybe a little bit off, but it's still fine to consume. Frozen, great to consume. Make like a ice, whatever. We'll eventually probably come out with that kind of your ices, as well. I think that's a great option. But yeah, you can freeze it, you can cool it, you can heat it. We've kind of tried it all, and so I just want to say, yeah, it'll never really go bad. I've tested so far as leaving it open on the counter, like just Baobab, no cover for like weeks on end, just see what would happen, and it literally lasted. So Steve said, I was expired question, good info to know. Yeah, US, yeah. So US is always main manufacturing. You might get some things that are 3 years. So Steve was just asking, um, the expired question. He said it's good to US know about the US regulations on expirations. But generally, yeah, 2 years if you're a kind of shelf stable product that has a 2 year shelf life. Everything else is obviously based on what they get when they do shelf testing. So, yogurt might be 6 months if they HPP it, meaning they pressure pasteurize it. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Scott, but like versus heating up the liquid, they just pressurize it. That can get you another 6 months. So let me see if I had anything else. Okay, I think I got all the questions.
All right.
Man, amazing talking to you. I'm glad we had some. This is smart to do it as a live. That's really cool to get the questions, bring
Agreed.
up the other, bring
Yeah,
up the other questions.
increases the relevance for people. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're down for it eventually, I'd like to do it again, and I would really like to bring in our Baobab supply guys. I think that you'd really be fascinated talking to those
Yeah.
guys at some point.
Yeah.
Whether we do it on this or just in general, because it's really cool what they're able to do with it and the potential of it. And so that's why we're continuing to do it. I love what you're doing. I appreciate you wanting to jump on this, explain that. Again, I think that's where we were at, just like-minded, and the uniqueness of it. I want to make people feel better, and you guys happen to be doing it. So. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I appreciate you reaching out to us, and this has been. It's been a productive relationship, and I think it's a win-win-win. It's a product that brings income that's much needed to a certain part of the world. It's a shelf-stable product. It meets a lot of the needs that we have in this present moment in terms of a lot of the health struggles that people have, and
Yeah,
it's been a life changing force for me. So, and you
it's
can,
it's so amazing to hear. Yeah, it's just
yeah,
like I think the win-win-win is the best way to describe the idea behind it needing to be all over the world, right? It's a win for the people producing it. It's a win for people consuming it. It's just a win all around, right? And then, yeah, like you brought up actually, I know this is probably too much, but the powder is really interesting because we don't have to ship liquid, and even from a shipping standpoint, like all these benefits that you can continue to add. It's just the most amazing fruit. So, like I said, I've just been super excited to hear all the benefits that have been coming from you guys and your patients, and I can't wait to hear more of them. So,
great.
all right, Scott. Well, we'll let that go from here. Thank you, everybody that was joining.
Thank you,
Really
everybody.
appreciate all those questions, and we'll see you next time.